On this episode, I'm talking to Andrew Doyle, the UK comedian who became famous for identifying as a particularly angry, woke white woman, but has become an important defender of free speech and a critic of all woke stupidity. Check it out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Andrew.
Hello.
It's good to finally meet you in person.
Yes.
Which we did yesterday.
Yes.
We are at Freedomfest, and you guys had just what I thought was a tremendous show last night. And it's part of your sort of comedy troupe that you do in the UK, right?
Yeah. So the show was Comedy Unleashed. And I set up Comedy Unleashed 6 years ago now, with my friend Andy Shaw. And the idea of setting it up was a monthly comedy night in London, old school comedy club, with, comedians who are not towing the line, who are subversive, but also funny.
Yeah.
Funny was the priority. I just started to notice that on the circuit, all of the targets were identical. So every act would be mocking the same thing. They'd all be saying, Brexit voters are all racist and stupid. Trump voters are all racist and stupid. Like it was getting quite banal. Not that there's anything wrong with joking about that or making those kind of jokes, but when everyone's doing it, it's kind of boring. There was a push for, I suppose, how would you put it? Box ticking identity politics. So you would have very mediocre acts elevated through the circuit very, very quickly on the basis of their sexuality, skin color, or something like that. So then a lot of these comedy shows became a diversity showcase rather than funny shows. So we weren't interested in that. We were saying we don't book people on the basis of their race or their sex or anything else. We book them if they're funny and interesting and they've got something to say. We don't book them on the basis of their politics. Nothing like that. And what happens, of course, is you end up with a diverse group of people anyway, because if you go for merit, that's how it works out, So we just don't apply those racist and sexist policies, and we do pretty well out of that. But if they're not funny, we don't rebook them, or we don't book them in the first place, and that works too. So, and we also like people to not self-censor. So the point is not that it's not that we're going to book the most controversial comics or the most. We don't say be as shocking as you can be. But what we do say is if you are shocking, if you are controversial, that's fine. And we're not going to have audience members complain and say, that was outrageous, we want our money back. We'll just tell them that's your problem, not our problem. It has happened a couple of times. There's a comedian friend of ours who had a gig pulled in Brighton because a couple of people tweeted the venue and said, we're offended by her material. And so they pulled her gig. She lost money. So we booked her, And if anyone were to complain to us, we wouldn't react in that way because we don't believe that comedy can exist without the potential to cause offense. I don't see how it possibly could, because anything could be offensive to someone. And also, I think there's a space for controversial comics. I mean, I don't consider myself an innately controversial comedian. So for me to go into that area would seem unnatural and weird. I just do what I do. But there are comedians out there who are naturally subversive, who want to say things that shock, who want to say things that throw us out of our comfortable mindset. And they should have a platform to do so. And they should have a platform where they can even get things wrong when they're trying material out.
Yeah.
And they can cause upset.
Yeah, we talked about that last night when you and Rob Schneider were on the main stage, that there's some important societal function that comedians do because they're allowed to say things that maybe your neighbor doesn't think you're allowed to say just as a person.
Yeah.
And then once you say it, and you're talking about something controversial, you're talking about something uncomfortable. Like I always talk about this in the context of transgenderism. If you can't have a conversation about it, you would never actually get to sort of tolerance, acceptance, and understanding of adults that are going through that.
Yeah.
And yet you're not allowed to have that conversation. And it, to me, it seems very toxic.
Yeah, it's the first movement of that kind that has sort of just demanded acceptance without attempting to persuade or explain or anything else. But part of the reason for that is the position there is not very similar to previous civil rights movements, insofar as there are good reasons why we don't treat people differently because of skin color. There are good reasons why we don't discriminate because of people's sexual orientation. But there are good reasons why we keep men out of women's spaces. And it is simply not true that human beings can change sex. It's never happened and it never will. Unless there's some big evolutionary leap that I can't anticipate. So the reason why you have a movement now that demands acquiescence at the cost of losing your livelihood is because it won't be able to persuade you of something that is factually wrong. And we often hear this idea that the trans rights movements is just a replay of the gay rights movement from 30, 40 years ago. And it's not. It's the precise opposite, because, of course, what trans rights activists are demanding is the erosion of gay rights. They're basically saying biological sex doesn't exist. Well, then you've just removed the entire underpinning of the gay rights movement, which is a recognition that a minority of people are attracted to their own sex. So actually, the stakes are pretty high. There is a clash there. Yeah. There is a conflict there. When it comes to comedy, you should be able to talk about this stuff. I mean, when we've had acts like Mary Burke, who talks about the trans issue on stage and specifically how that affects women. And she does it in a brilliant way because it's not preachy, it's funny. And there's a sense of relief in the audience that people are talking about this, that people are actually addressing it. And, I did a set recently about, we've had some problems in London with groups of Islamic fundamentalists calling for jihad on the streets of London, and then the Metropolitan Police defending them and putting out a tweet saying, well, jihad, it doesn't mean a holy war, it means a kind of spiritual, internal, meditative struggle. But this is a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is banned in most Arab nations. They are calling for violence, right? The context is so clear, but our police are defending them and trying to cover for them. So I did a set about that.
I was going to say, how do you write a joke when the real world is the joke?
Right. Well, that's another problem is, when you take a group like Queers for Palestine, how do you make that funnier than they already are themselves? Yeah. It's difficult. I don't buy into this idea, though, that satire is difficult, is impossible when the world goes mad. You just have to find another way. It's always possible. I did it. I have jokes about Queers for Palestine, and it isn't just repeating what they say, although that would be funny in of itself. People found this with Trump. I mean, I think with Donald Trump, people find it difficult to mock him in a way. I mean, they do it a lot, but it gets quite bland and boring just about him being orange and things like that. And part of the problem is that he's funnier than they are. He's funnier than most comedians, and his Twitter feed was always a lot funnier than the people mocking him. So it's difficult, but you find a way.
Yeah, I wonder, you're describing how bland and even synchronized, or they almost became, instead of comedy, like the comedy scene became just left-wing talking points, and that absolutely is happening in the States as well. Who exported this woke totalitarianism? Did it come from the States over to the UK, or did you guys do it first?
It's difficult. A lot of it came from the US, but it goes back further than that. I mean, you could say a lot of there's a strand of it that comes from the Frankfurt School, which is obviously from the US. Although not originally, if you're going to go right back to where Adorno and Horkheimer, etc., came from. But if you want to talk about movement, you would say there's elements of the Frankfurt School, particularly their mistrust of popular culture, and then you've got the French postmodernists of the 1960s and 70s, and all of that is kind of feeds into this stuff, the idea that our entire understanding of reality is mediated through language, and language constructs reality. That's very much at the heart of the current woke movement, even if they don't kind of trace it back in that direct way, but it is very much there. Hence you get the kind of the idea that words are violence, for instance, that there's no difference between the two things. That only makes sense in a postmodern, from a postmodern perspective. But there's things like critical race theory. Obviously that's originated in legal scholarship in the late 1980s in America. Intersectionality very much from America. But then fact studies actually started in Britain, which is an entire movement that kind of launders false information through academic journals to promote the idea that there's no correlation between obesity and bad health, which is insane.
Yeah,
of course it is.
Yeah,
but when you have enough reputable journals quoting each other and generating this illusion of an idea being true, that's how you get these ideas being promoted. So that's come from Britain, weirdly, which I'm surprised at, because there's more obesity in America, but nevertheless it's come from Britain. What else is there? There's queer theory, but as I say, that you could drive that back to Foucault and his followers. So I suppose when you're talking about the woke movement, you're talking about a set of interdependent strands which are coming from all over the place, but really they all at their heart share certain core beliefs, predominantly that language needs to be controlled in order that social justice may be achieved. That's one of the main things, which is why they're for censorship. They also believe in this notion of power structures undergirding society, that everything must be seen through the prism of power, the power relations. Again, that has a direct line back to Foucault. So they have those sort of core ideas embedded into their system, and it comes from all sorts of places. But it's not. I know people talk about the long march through the institutions. I don't see it as conspiratorial in that way, precisely because there seem to be multiple influences at play here.
Yeah.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with BlazeTV. The only place you're going to see this is BlazeTV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there.
Yeah, it's so bizarre to see comedy of all things taken over by that. I mean, I'm old enough. I grew up listening to George Carlin and Richard Pryor, and my understanding of comedy, not even thinking about it in any political or philosophical way, is that this is the one place where people can say whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah,
and it often makes you quite uncomfortable. Like he just said that.
Yeah.
And it forces things. And, this was the Lenny Bruce tradition. But it's just bizarre to me that comedians, or at least the people that think they can self-govern comedians, are now like speech police.
Yes, but it's connected to a broader problem with the arts generally, because this movement sees the arts as merely another conduit for the message. And it reduces, so in their view, the Mona Lisa is just paint daubed on wood to service the interests of white males. That's how they see it. They see everything through group identity. This is why we have Sheffield University put out a video saying that the only reason we study Chaucer and Shakespeare is because they're white men. We recently, in fact, just a few weeks ago, there's a university in London called SOAS, and they were saying that Western philosophy needs to be decolonized, so we no longer focus on Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, because they're just dead white men. So when you can only see the world through the prism of group identity, that's where you end up. You end up with this infantile worldview. How can you read the work of Shakespeare and just think this is about promoting the interests of white men? You would have to be a child. But it is a childish view. Imagine all that you're missing in the Shakespeare canon by doing that. It's insane.
Yeah.
And comedy's the same. So with comedy, you could say, in whose interests is that joke being told? Who's being promoted there? Who's being denigrated there? What power relations are going on there? Which is why we get this constant talk of punching up or punching down, which doesn't make sense in comedy, because you can punch every which way. It depends on the type of comic you are. I tend to punch up insofar as that's my natural comedic instinct, is to mock the powerful, because I'm very into satire and I like pointing out the follies of those in charge. Now, at the moment, the people in charge, the people who have all the major institutional clout, are the woke activists. So I mock them. But I would mock any closed system of thought. but they don't see themselves. They see themselves as the underdogs.
Yeah.
Even though they are supported by the entire corporate world, you know, Meghan Markle and Harry, royalty for God's sake, they're supported by all of academia, all of the major institutions, and yet they still say we are being oppressed. It's quite funny. Inherently, that's quite funny.
Yeah. Hopefully, you've never made fun of them.
Of who? The woke people.
No, the Harry and
Meghan, of course. Yeah, I mean, with Harry, you know,
they're so sensitive though.
They are. It got to the point where, again, you know, you can't have a man lecturing people, berating them about their privilege, when he's an actual prince.
Right.
I mean, how can that be anything other than inherently funny?
Yeah.
You know. So, and you know, I'm sure Meghan, you know, the way, you know, she does get upset by her treatment in the press. And I don't disbelieve that she sincerely interprets it as a form of racism, but it's not. I mean, the British press were really pro her when they were getting married. They were really excited about this. They turned on her because she started whinging and attacking them and all the rest of it. And she's interpreted that as racism, but I'd like to see evidence. The problem with part of this movement is the accusation is taken as proof. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely what's happened there. You know, I don't think they're bad people. I just think they're espousing some really ludicrous ideas, and people in power who espouse ludicrous ideas deserve to be mocked.
I thought it was extra cool when they came over to America to explain to us how to better be Americans. That was helpful.
Yeah,
that was helpful.
I hope you've learned a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they flew commercial.
Yes.
Because otherwise they would be hypocrites. And that's not possible.
No.
So what do you think about, so my thesis that I proposed last night is that comedians can save us from ourselves. You know, if you're being grandiose, they can save us from the world, because it's these hypocrisies that are just where you guys go. You can't help but start poking at those balloons.
I wonder about that. I mean, I've actually been asked that question a number of times in terms of, you know, I did this satirical character, Titania McGrath, which I started about 6 years ago. And when all that blew up and the book came out, people were saying, are you making a difference? Is this helping, or are you making things worse? And actually, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it is a movement that is pretty impervious to humor, because it's a movement of the humorless. They don't know how to react when they're being mocked, but then no tyrant ever has. I mean, we did a stage show with Titania, which I wrote the script for it was a West End show. It was in a London big theatre, and The Guardian reviewed it, and they wrote in the review, what are we laughing at? And of course, we're laughing at them. Yeah. But they can't see it. Right. So
that's not funny.
And I
don't even get it.
They don't understand. Well, of course, but if they found it funny, I'd be doing something very wrong. You know, it's, but does that change anyone's mind, or does it make them more entrenched? I don't know. But I think what it does do is, if you can expose the absurdity of something to those who are a bit on the fence, or those who don't particularly understand what the movement's about, that can be quite a positive thing. And I have had a lot of messages from people saying, oh, you did actually open my eyes to this, which is very flattering, because I think, oh, okay, so maybe in some cases I have made a bit of a difference with that. Because a lot of people don't understand it. Yeah. They buy the language that the activists use. The activists describe themselves as progressive and liberal, even though they are regressive and illiberal. And they call themselves anti-racists, even though they are rehabilitating racism in an incredibly entrenched way. So when people just hear the language, you know, but there's an actress in England called Kathy Burke, and a video of her went viral recently. She was saying, you know, oh, being woke just means being against racism. So come on, kids, be woke. Well, she doesn't know what it means. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't know what the activists are promoting. Because if she did know, I'm sure she doesn't agree with censorship or dividing people by skin color, or seeing people in terms of their race, gender, sexuality before them as human individuals. I'm sure she doesn't believe all those things. So she's bought into the linguistic tricks of the movement. That's how they really get a lot of fellow travelers. So,
were you the one describing a school maybe that had started separating schools based on kids based on the color of their skin?
Yeah, that
actually happened.
That happened in the American school in London, which is a very posh school. So a lot of this, because it's such a middle class movement.
Do they have separate water fountains?
Well, quite. That would be the next step. Yeah, presumably. I don't know what happened at the Brentwood School in California, where they did the similar thing. They separated parents. There was, you know, those parents' evenings, parents coming out to talk to the teachers. Mm-hmm. They had a room for white parents and a room for non-white parents. They didn't say where the mixed couples went. I don't know how that would work. They had a very sort of narrow view of that. So it's a thing. It's a thing, because if you say that if you just reduce humanity to the oppressed class and the oppressor class, and you say the whites are in this class and everyone else is in the other class, well, when you have a mixed race family, you're telling that child your mother is oppressed by your father, and they see that it's an incoherent philosophy, and it's also deeply anti-liberal. And it's also one of the most unforgivable thing I think about this movement. It has brought racism back to the fore in a very real way.
Yeah.
People notice race more than they ever did. I think about when I was growing up, and my favorite comedy show was a show which featured 2 black actors in the main roles. This is a show called Red Dwarf. But I never noticed. And it wasn't that I don't see the color. You can see the color. But it never crossed my mind that it was even a thing.
Yeah.
If I saw that show now as a new show, I'd be like, oh, I see diverse casting going on there. Mm-hmm. You brought that person in there, and it makes you doubt why they're there. It makes you think, are they there because they're funny or good at what they do, or are they there to tick a box? And that's not fair on them either. A friend of mine said that her black friend said to her that he never used to notice, that he never used to feel black.
Yeah.
But now he feels it everywhere he goes and in every conversation he has. And that's a tragedy, because the ideal of colorblindness, as espoused by Martin Luther King, was a glorious ideal. And it's often misinterpreted. People say, oh, you can't be colorblind. What, you're saying you don't see race? Everyone sees race. We just don't treat people differently on that basis. That's the goal, surely. I mean, who was it? Was it Sam Harris who talked about, imagine a world where we saw skin color as analogous to whether you have red hair or blonde hair. We see it.
Yeah.
We don't care.
Yeah.
That's surely the goal. And this movement has taken us back by decades, I think.
I didn't up until, let's say, 2010, and I used to be a Tea Party organizer, so political and controversial on the left, and I ended up going on Don Lemon's show on CNN, and he had the current head of the NAACP, and I was on, and of course they were accusing me of being a racist, and I said our philosophy is colorblind, and Don Lemon scolded me for that. He said, that can't be right. That can't be right. And I said, okay, how about judging people based on the content of their character? And he said, okay. He didn't get the context of the entire civil rights movement and what Martin Luther King had fought for. And I also grew up just not noticing color.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I moved to Washington, D.C., and particularly at that interview, I didn't know that the word colorblind was a bad thing to say.
Right.
I thought that's what we were striving for, judging people based on the content of their character.
Once you put it in those terms, once you would take up a Martin Luther King speech, did he get what you meant then?
I don't think he got the historical context of it, because this clip's still on, and you can watch the head of the NAACP getting frustrated because he knew what I was doing. Now,
was this when there was a white woman pretending to be black at the head of the NAACP?
This was before that.
It was before Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Well, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. I'm surprised that he wouldn't. But then I'm not, because, if you read White Fragility, read that by Robin DiAngelo, she explicitly problematizes the notion of colorblindness. She says it's a form of white supremacy.
It must be like a generational thing where the new, let's call it the civil rights movement, even though it's anti-civil rights, is very intersectional. And they're dividing everybody based on ethnicity and sexual preference and color and all that. And Don Lemon must have not gotten the memo from MLK.
Right.
I guess. I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, activists have basically said MLK is a white supremacist.
Yeah.
That's where we are. You have Robin DiAngelo. She's a white woman. Says she knows better about race than Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And that what he was saying was, she doesn't call him a white supremacist, but she says that his philosophy is a white supremacist one. That's insane. I mean, that again, it's probably funnier than people can make it.
Yeah.
But it's also deeply racist. One of the interesting things about that book is Robin DiAngelo is a racist. She's a self-confessed racist, so she's not going to sue me for saying this because she says it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
She said, but she even describes an anecdote where she's going to a street party, and she's been invited to this party, and she walks down the street, and on one side is predominantly black people in a party, and the other side is predominantly white. And she said she's seized with a panic. What if I've been invited to the black party? And then she says, oh, now I realize that all white people hate black people. In other words, she has a racist reaction and assumes that all other white people would have an identical reaction. Well, I wouldn't. You know, she doesn't get to speak to me.
Yeah.
So it looks very, I don't like to go into the COD psychology of this, but it looks very much like she's taking her own racism and excusing it by projecting it onto all white people. It looks like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. I want to go back to Tatiana McGrath, because you sometimes identify as a very angry, woke white woman. For people that don't know the backstory about where she came from, because that's how I found you.
Oh, okay.
At the time, and I just thought I actually had to look twice to make sure that it was a joke.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't sure at all.
Well, it was pretty close to the truth, you know, and a lot of the things that Titania has said have come true. Back in the day, I did a thread. There's about 15 of them where she made a comment, which then became a reality in terms of the media actually promoting the thing that she'd said. You know, she said something about how white parents should send their teenage daughters on unaccompanied walking holidays in northern Pakistan, in the tribal regions of northern Pakistan, to prove they weren't racist. Well, they didn't do that. They were being racist. And there was an article promoting the same thing a few weeks later in Forbes magazine. So you get in there first by envisaging how far is this going to go. I mean, she, in the book Woke, she problematized Helen Keller, said that even though Helen Keller couldn't see or hear or anything, she was still white. She still had white privilege. And that's exactly what appeared in an article last year in, what was it? I can't remember the publication, but it's something big like the New Yorker or something.
Yeah.
So you can't, nothing I could come up with.
So is she feeding corporate media these ideas?
I don't think so. I hope not.
Let's run with that.
I mean,
we were thinking it, but she said it.
Well, when she said, for instance, you shouldn't put biological sex on birth certificates, you should wait until the baby's old enough to decide for themselves. That's now being promoted by a medical journal.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've given them ideas. I think all it is that I've read so much of their stuff that I can sort of think how they think.
Yeah.
And I can take their logic to its end point. And I know that they have no break. They will keep accelerating as far as they can go. Some of the stuff that has been problematized as racist is insane. The one that keeps coming back in England is the countryside is racist. It excludes black people. Every black person I know is fully capable of walking into a meadow, but they say that they can't do that, apparently. You know, that's the other thing. They're very patronizing. Yeah. Like I say, it's a racist movement, but it's also patronizing.
Being on time, math.
Oh, incredible. You know,
radically racist concepts.
This is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
This is a perfect movement for racists, though, because you can say the most awful racist things and consider yourself virtuous.
Yeah.
You can say black people are never on time. It's a white thing. And you'll get applauded for it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Tell the story about the Nazi dog. Because I do think that you guys on your side of the pond are taking it further than us in terms of like going after guys that tweet and going after a guy who takes a video of his dog.
Okay, well I think the only reason why we are going further is because you have the First Amendment and we don't. So we don't have free speech protections in the way that you do. And what that means is when the woke virus hits, we are not inoculated against it in the way that the US is. I think that's all it is. I don't think that we instinctively want to take it further. I just think we don't have an impediment a constitutional impediment in the way that you do. What happened with Marcus Meekin, whose online moniker is Countdown Killer, is that, and by the way, he only had like 8 followers on YouTube when he did this video, so no one was watching it. He now has over 1 million or something. So actually it's been pretty good for him.
Yeah.
But he made this video, he explains in the video, now YouTube took it down so you probably can't see it, but you can see it because Comedy Unleashed, which is my comedy night, we actually showed the film to a live audience to see what their reaction would be at the club. And part of the reason for that is he put this video up. I'll explain what the video is. He put the video up. He's teaching his girlfriend's cute pug dog to do a Nazi salute. And he does it because she says the dog is very cute and adorable. The joke is actually a very simple one. The joke is an anti-Nazi joke. The joke is, she says the dog is cute, so I'm going to turn it into the most evil thing, which is a Nazi, right? So the whole joke is predicated on the notion that Nazis are evil. And yet this got him a criminal record, right? And partly it's the phraseology he uses. So obviously, the more extreme the dog can be, the funnier the joke is. So he teaches the dog to react excitedly to the phrase, gas the Jews. And therefore he uses that phrase about 20 odd times in the video. He also got it to, when he says the phrase, Sieg Heil, the dog raises its paw like it's doing a Sieg Heil. So really, it was the language in of itself, that phrase, gas the Jews. They said, that's an offensive, that's a horrible phrase. Well, yes, of course it is. But when you're saying it to a pug, it kind of takes the power out of the phrase, you know? No one is saying that that gassing the Jews is a okay thing to do or a funny thing to do. Quite the reverse, right? Look, you know this. I don't have to explain the joke to you. And anyway, so it went to court. The police, it got a couple of million views online. It went viral. No one complained. So 2 million people watched it. No one complained to the police. The police themselves actively went out to trawl for complainants. This is the Scottish police who are out of control. They went to the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities and said, do you find this offensive? And they said, yes. That's not surprising. You know, if you've got relatives who died in the Holocaust, the phrase gas the Jews is going to be a sensitive thing. You might well find that offensive and upsetting. And I understand that. And so did he. But they didn't complain until the police asked them to complain. And that was enough for it to get him arrested. It was a 2-year trial. It cost a lot of money. The judge found him guilty because in Scotland they have a bizarre judicial system where there's no jury. It was a sheriff's court. And they basically said they had cybercrime intelligence look through all of his emails, text, everything. No evidence of any far-right sympathies whatsoever by the prosecution's own admission. What they were saying is, we are convicting you on the joke alone, the joke video alone. That's what happened. And in the end, they found him guilty, fined him 800 quid. He refused to pay it and was willing to do jail time. So they just took it out of his bank account. And I think they did that because if he went to jail, he would become a proper free speech martyr. It would have been, so that's what happened. And then, we had comedians condemning him and saying, well, he shouldn't have joked about this. He's not a proper comedian. It wasn't funny. So what? There are lots of professional comedians in the UK.
Do you have a license to practice comedy?
Well, quite exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we're doing it that way, if you're not funny enough, you get arrested, then there are some professional comedians who should be arrested at the moment. I can point the police in their direction if they want. It's insane. And also humor, as making jokes, that's something all of us do. Like you say, you don't need a license for it. Anyway, we showed the video in the club, and the audience laughed a lot, and it clearly is funny to some people. So that proved that point. I don't think everyone found it funny. I know people who don't find it funny at all, but they don't think he should have been arrested for it. So that's what happened with Marcus Meekin. But it's not the only time it's happened, and the reason it happened is because we have a thing called the Communications Act 2003, which basically says anything you post online that is deemed grossly offensive, that's the phrase they use, grossly offensive, is a criminal offence or can be a criminal offence. That is, of course, such a hopelessly subjective term.
Yeah. I want to tell you about this new brand that we love here at Free the People. Our friend Jennifer Say, free speech warrior and truth teller, has started her own athletic clothing brand. It's called XXXY Athletics, and it is the only athletic brand standing up for women's sports. We met Jen when she spoke out against the insanity of COVID lockdowns and school closures, and stood up for our freedoms. She risked her reputation to do the right thing, and she's doing it again now. A lot of other brands out there claim to champion women, but only Jen actually does it with her new brand, XXXY Athletics. As a former elite gymnast, she was the 1986 national champion. She knows the importance of protecting Title IX. And as the former Levi's brand president, she knows a thing or two about great products. XXXY Athletics just launched their performance wear for both men and women, including cool t-shirts, bike shorts, and leggings. So check it out at xx-xyathletics.com or thetruthfits.com. Don't give your money to athletic brands who don't share your values. Give it to a brand that speaks truth, stands up for free speech, and puts quality first. Use the code Kibbe75 and you'll get free shipping with orders of $75 or more. Finally, an athletic brand with a cause you can get behind. Go show XXXY Athletics some love. Wear the truth out loud. Go to xx-xyathletics.com and use the code Kibbe75. That's KIBBE75 to order. Do it now.
We're sliding in that direction, and you surely noticed I call it the censorship industrial complex that kicked into high gear, trying to censor certain epidemiologists who were questioning the government's approach to lockdowns and pandemics, and Elon Musk exposed all this, but the granular nature of bureaucrats at the alphabet agencies, FBI, CIA, who knows exactly where it was, Homeland Security, the creepy name for an agency. They're sitting there reading some poor guy's joke about Donald Trump or Joe Biden and deciding whether or not it's acceptable. And, we just had a Supreme Court case, and only 3 justices said it is more complicated than this, but basically only 3 justices said this is a fundamental violation of the First Amendment. Right. And I'm like, this is America, right? Like this, I thought free speech was not something that we had to teach anybody. I thought it was just a given.
I think so. I mean, that's something that I'm really worried about, because in a constitutional republic, you have these guarantees embedded into your existence. But what if the highest level of the judiciary is captured by the ideology? What if the government is captured by the ideology? Then things can change. You need those guarantees. I mean, that's chilling. I mean, the fact that the Twitter files weren't really reported on anywhere near as much as they ought to have been tells you an awful lot. The idea of the FBI colluding with big tech to censor, I don't understand how everyone isn't up in arms about that, irrespective of their political affiliation. Both sides were trying it, by the way, the Republican,
of course,
as well. So they weren't as successful because their politics don't align with Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, this is, and it just goes to show, doesn't it, that the urge to censor is not party political. That will come from any direction.
But like everything the Biden administration is doing, someday a Republican will be elected and he's going to be like, hold my beer.
Yeah.
If censorship is a thing, I'm going to
or
double
if
down.
you can elevate a misdemeanor that's out of the statute of limitations to a felony in order to imprison your political opponent. You think the Republicans won't do that?
Yeah.
Like, what a precedent are you setting? I mean, it's absolutely insane. So, I worry about that because I always see America as like this beacon of free speech insofar as it is protected. But then even the ACLU, which once protected neo-Nazis' right to march in Skokie, now I've done a complete reverse on that. And they you have that lawyer, it was the lawyer who works with the ACLU, Chase Strangio, I think his name is, saying that he will die on this hill of banning a book. It was Abigail Schreier's book, I think.
Yeah.
So the scary thing about this ideology is it can capture any institution, and when it doesn't take much. Just when you've got a few prominent members of any institution, it falls.
Yeah.
And then every institution becomes merely a conduit for the woke message. That's all it doesn't serve its original function. In the way that higher education, the universities are no longer about education; they're about the madrasas for the message, basically.
I actually had, I forget her name at the moment, but I had the head of the ACLU, and we were talking specifically about their willingness to defend sort of the tiki torch guys, whatever they were, but let's call them Nazis. And she was still proudly saying, this is what we do. This is our history. That's what they've always done.
Yeah.
And within a year or two, just a switch flipped.
Yeah.
And part of it is like they're captured by perhaps their donor base, and their donor base is no longer liberal, it's woke.
Yeah.
But it just destroyed the institution.
Yeah, it's gone. I think that one's gone. I think in the UK, Stonewall has fallen. Stonewall used to be a gay rights charity. Now it's anti-gay rights. But not. It doesn't think it is.
Yeah.
It is.
You just did a show on this. Explain this, the shift.
Oh, well, I mean, it's difficult because basically, effectively, what happened, Stonewall, of course, is named after the Stonewall riots in New York from 1969. But Stonewall was the foremost prominent gay rights group in the UK at a time when equal rights did not exist, insofar as you had a different age of consent. You had you didn't have hospital visitation rights or inheritance rights. There were real problems. You didn't have equal marriage, etc. So Stonewall was fighting for all of that. And then by 2015, equal rights had been achieved. Everything had been achieved. So they pivoted into trans rights. So then it became LGBT. And what this then said is that we are going to promote an ideology that says we each have an innate gendered soul, which might be mismatched with our body. And the end result of that is that, as I've said, gay people are people who are attracted to their own sex. But if you say that biological sex is not a thing, I mean, Stonewall redefined the phrase homosexual on their website from same-sex attracted to same-gender attracted. So Stonewall are saying that unless you if you're a gay man and you don't include women who identify as men in your dating pool, you're a transphobe. I mean, Nancy Kelly, who was a CEO of Stonewall, described women, lesbians, who don't want to sleep with people with penises, as sexual racists. So what you have now is a gay rights movement shaming gay people for being gay. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's what Pride is all about now, is shaming gay people for being gay. We had lesbians thrown out of Pride in Cardiff because they were carrying a sign saying lesbians don't like penises. But that is kind of the deal.
See, this could be a movie.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be sort of idiocracy, but intersectional idiocracy.
And what's really upsetting about it is, you watch Pride now, there's loads of gay people on Pride. They think they're flying the flag for homosexuality. They're flying the flag for its erosion and destruction.
Yeah.
And they don't see it. I would have thought that as soon as, there's a lesbian called Jenny Watson who had a lesbian speed dating event in London, and men turned up saying they identify as lesbians and they demanded to be part of it. The venue shut it down because she said no. Now, if you can't even host a speed dating event, which is about women trying to find other women, if you have to include men, there's a problem in Australia, in Melbourne, I think it's illegal for women to gather without men because they say if a man identifies as a woman, he is a woman. How is this anything other than deeply regressive? Grindr, this is a hookup site for men. It says you can't filter out women who identify as men because that makes you a bigot. But no, it doesn't make you a bigot, it makes you gay. I had a message from a friend who was in a sex club in Germany saying it's full of girls who've had their breasts cut off who think they're men, who think they're gay men. There's no erections in that room anymore. It's a complete boner killer. Gay men aren't interested in women. It's kind of the deal.
I just hope these guys don't learn that they could actually play in women's sports, because that's a bridge too far.
Well, it's already happened, of course. I mean,
what?
Yeah. Well, but that's insane. Like Leah Thomas, I think that changed everything though, because there was that image of Leah Thomas standing on the podium, broad-shouldered bloke, towering over these girls.
Yeah.
I think that changed people's views. Then you can't look at that and think that's any way other than grossly unfair. Also, kind of grotesque. He's exposing himself in front of teenage girls.
Mm-hmm.
He's forcing them to accept that he's going to undress with them. Actually, in the UK, we've got an interesting one. There are 8 nurses, I think, in the NHS who are suing the NHS because the NHS has said you have to get undressed in front of men. They're saying these men identify as women. You have to be in the same room when you're naked. And now they're suing them. So I think things are going to push back when it comes to that. I think that's going to be a big
This goes back to sort of like, are you saving the world, or are you just entrenching the wokes?
Yeah.
The way I think about it, and you said this, but I think so many people are in the middle, and they're told that I have to say X, Y, and Z to be virtuous, and I know I'm not a racist, so I don't want to be a racist, so I say that I'm woke, but I have no idea what the context is. And then you have sort of the radical, entrenched, intellectual wokes, who don't really represent most normal folks. Like, people just don't think that way. So I think our job in all of this, and this is why I think comedians are so important, you're not talking to the radicals. You're talking to people that are trying to figure it out, and they're uncomfortable talking about it. So they go to a show and you say something, and they look around and they start laughing. Okay, I can laugh at this.
Yeah.
And then you realize, well, that's just fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Like, why would anyone believe that?
Yeah.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love liberty and look cool.
Yeah, and once it's okay to laugh at something, it kind of punctures it. It punctures its pretensions to be something that it isn't. And of course, yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There was a study by the More in Common initiative, and it found that in the UK at least, 13% of the population are what you would call woke in terms of their belief system. So that means that they are a minority in every generation. I mean, this is often misunderstood as being a generational issue, young versus the old. Actually, the majority of young people are anti-woke. But the problem is, as I said, you don't need many of the woke to get into an institution before it falls. They can conquer on the basis of a minority, and they do. So yeah, if you can be reassured, it's one of those moments where suddenly, and that's why I think it will fall, because it'll happen quite quickly. We've had a good step forward in the UK with the Cass Review, which is a 4-year study by a leading pediatric specialist, Dr. Hilary Cass, who is now a Lord in the House of Lords, who has presented all of the evidence to show that gender affirmative care, there's no evidence base for it at all. This is dangerous stuff. And suddenly in the UK, everyone's breathing a sigh of relief and saying, okay, great, we can now talk about this. And it really has opened things up. Even the Labour Party has said they're going to implement the findings of the Cass Review. So it's blown apart the idea of gender affirmative care. Now, America's resistant because you've got WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which is, of course, a cult body, which is resisting this. They're deemed to be the experts because they say they're the experts. But Cass is, and they said the Cass is review, lots of these specialists saying the Cass Review is a bigoted, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But they actually can't do that for long, because how can they would need to prove that we have this gendered soul.
Yeah.
That's what they need to do. If they want to mutilate children, if they want to block their puberty, which is their human right, if they want to socially transition kids, call them different names, etc., you would have to prove that there is this thing called a gendered soul. The only cure for that is to medicalize and change the body.
Yeah.
But even that's incoherent, because they also say gender is fluid and could change day by day. So why are you changing someone's body then? So it cannot stand with rational scrutiny.
Yeah.
It's only lasted so long because of bullying, because of saying, by destroying people's lives if they dare to question it. But, as I say, with the Cass Review in the UK, we've had a bit of a sea change, and maybe that will happen here as well. I mean, in my book, I wrote a book called The New Puritans, where I compare all this to what went on in Salem. What's quite interesting about what happened in Salem, Massachusetts, is it ended quite rapidly. And it just took one moment where, the deputy governor decided to write to all of the major clergymen and said, oh, by the way, is spectral evidence admissible in court? Which is the girls saying they saw it. And they all said no. And it just collapsed overnight. And that was it. And there's one moment, actually, when the girls were crossing the Ipswich Bridge, and they all started screaming, doing their thing. They saw someone walk, and they screamed at them that they were a witch, etc. But everyone ignored them and just carried on, and they never did it again. And I think it'll be a similar moment. I think what will happen is everyone will start saying, actually, no, we don't have to do what these screaming pink-haired activists tell us to do. They shouldn't have this clout. And I think it'll collapse very quickly.
So last question. You were an academic, a professor at some point. Is that correct?
Well, this is a very American thing. So I think anyone who's works in universities gets called professor here.
Okay.
In the UK, that's a chair, so you're like a top academic.
Yeah.
So I most certainly was not that.
But I'm going to ask you a question out of left field, very much related to the story you just told, because I realized, and I've done a lot of work on the pandemic industrial complex, which, by the way, is the same thing as the censorship industrial complex in our country.
Yeah.
And you discover along the way that so many institutions have been captured by stupid, including these academic journals, the health journals in particular that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
They are violating the most basic scientific standards. How do we save science from this madness, because in my country, and I think probably in yours as well, the science, as Fauci calls it, nobody believes any of it anymore. And that's a very dangerous thing.
So that's what we call a legitimation crisis, is, when those who are in authority are obviously lying. When you have leading medical journals saying that sex is a spectrum, when anyone with a GCSE in biology knows it isn't, that's scary. So again, it's an example of ideological capture and how it can go to the very highest level. Why is it that a leading journal was saying that the very notion that the virus might have leaked from a lab in Wuhan is a racist conspiracy theory that must be automatically dismissed? Leading journal saying that, and now everyone says, "Oh, that's probably true," right? So that's scary. Why were the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration so demonized? Isn't this meant to be science? Aren't we meant to be talking about possibilities and examining, the evidence? I don't know how you do that, but I always thought that science and maths and those disciplines would be impervious to this, that they had a natural built-in resistance. So I understand why this came from the humanities with this kind of airy-fairy theorizing.
Yeah.
I didn't think you could suddenly say 2 + 2 = 5, which is precisely what leading mathematicians are now saying.
Well, because math is racist.
But yeah, exactly. It was that Professor Rochelle Gutierrez who said that mathematics operates as whiteness.
Yeah,
that's the phrase she used. That's insane. This woman shouldn't be in that job, right?
Yeah.
So it's just not. I don't want to cancel her. I'm just saying she's not good enough. So if she's saying that, and similarly with medical, there was an article in Psychology Today, just out today, where he talks about the gender identity and biological sex and how feminists believe that the two must be aligned. Well, no, feminists don't believe in gender identity. Like, he hasn't even got the basics right about the argument, and he's publishing it in a journal. So, because ideology robs you of the capacity to think critically, and it robs you of the capacity to think, because you're just parroting a script. That's all you're doing. You're asking me how it can be saved, and I don't know. The answer is I don't know. All I can think is, there are different points of view on this. I know Peter Boghossian thinks we need to just destroy academia and start from scratch. Helen Pluckrose, who's a friend of his and mine, takes the other view that no, we need to reform the universities and get them back on track. I don't know which is the correct approach. I have good days and bad days in this. Sometimes I think academia is lost and you may as well not bother. But it is so important because all of this starts in academia and then filters outward. And that's what's happened with the journals, that kind of thing.
I do think that a lot of young people create their own curriculums when they listen to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan has some guy on who's smart about something.
Yeah.
And to me, that's where I get the hope. So I would be more in the forget academia. It's sort of a dead thing. Of it now,
maybe.
but it's a push and pull kind of thing. Like I suspect. If they don't have a cartel on truth anymore because some crazy comedian's interviewing some academic who wasn't allowed to publish in the journals, they have to reform themselves. So maybe it's both.
There are good reasons why, universities like Oxford and Cambridge that have been around for 1,000 years, they have incredible resources, and there's a reason why people want to go there. I couldn't have gone elsewhere because I was working with 16th century manuscripts. Well, the biggest collection of those is in the Bodleian and Oxford. So, there's a reason why people need these institutions. And maybe I hope we can turn things around, but maybe it's both. Like you said, we can work to reform those institutions but there are good people in those places trying to get things back on track. It's not all lost. Most of the people who are going along with it are doing so reluctantly and out of fear. That can change with a cultural shift. There are glimmers of hope. At Oxford, we had students after Black Lives Matter demanding that the statue of Cecil Rhodes on Oriel College was torn down, and the college resisted, and it didn't happen. So, there's a way to push back. And then similarly, if you have new university, the University of Austin at Texas, Ralston College in Savannah by Stephen Blackwood. I've just done a series of lectures for the Peterson Academy on William Shakespeare. And that's an interesting approach. He's saying, He will offer an online course for people which will be better quality than the universities at a fraction of the cost. Well, that's got to be a win, hasn't it? I mean, whether it gets accredited or not, I don't know. But, you know, education is its own reward, isn't it? So maybe this one, as you say, maybe people, you know, actually reading for yourself is probably the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
Actually reading books, reading, if you're interested in any particular discipline. So, for instance, if you're interested in English literature, just read a critical text published before 1960 and you'll be fine. You know, or read the texts. You know, don't read anything about Shakespeare written in the last 10 years because it will be a load of intersectional nonsense.
Yeah.
Just read the books.
Okay, so the set last night was amazing. We were all laughing our butts off.
Oh, thank you.
In the back of the room. Is that something that you guys will release?
Oh, you mean in terms of filming it? And
yeah.
Probably not, actually. We film a lot. So we do the night Comedy Unleashed in London every month. We film the shows and we put clips of the shows out on our YouTube channel. So if you go to Comedy Unleashed YouTube channel, there's a lot of clips of the kind of comedians I've been talking about there, myself included. But I don't like to film any of the set. Because I think there's too much out there. It spoils the live experience a little bit. You know?
And your alter ego, Tatiana McGrath, is still tweeting her ass.
Well, not really. I mean, I don't tweet very much as her anymore because it's been 6 years. I've kind of done it.
You've done it.
And the other problem with it is, you know, she's a monomaniac. She's obsessed with this one thing, which means that it gets quite repetitive.
Yeah.
Because how could it be otherwise? She can't suddenly start tweeting about something else because that wouldn't be in her nature. It's very interesting because a lot of people say it's a one joke character. It's like, it's a satirical representation of a monomaniac. So how could it be anything else? But the problem with that as well is I've written 2 books as her and a live show as her, and I've tweeted for years as her. What more can I do? You know. So I think, it's just for me. So I write an article as her every month for the Critic magazine, and I post that on Twitter as well. But I don't really tweet as her anymore. I've done that, and I like to move on in life.
So people should find the real you on X.
Probably. Although I'm tweeting much less than I used to. I'm on Substack now, which I find much better because on X or Twitter, there's something about that platform that lends itself to ferocity and irrational behavior, shall we say. So I'm not interested in that.
So people should find you on Substack. Anywhere else?
No, Substack's the best place because that's where I'm posting articles and videos and things like that. And it's freer as well because you can talk to people in the comments and you know, you don't just get people calling you a Nazi and things like that. So you know, that's quite nice as well. So yeah, Substack is basically the place for me. Or my books, you know, The New Puritans is the most recent book, and that's part of the point of that book was precisely what you were saying earlier about a lot of people don't understand what the movement is about, and that book is me explaining what the movement is for people who are not really within it, who are just sort of going along with it because they've been gulled by the language. So cool. That's the idea of that.
Well, thank you for doing this. This is fun.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.